And the Scroll of Thoth is once again live. Welcome back, gentlemen.
All
How's
right,
it
bro.
going?
Yeah.
Hey, hey. So how's your week been?
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, it's been excellent for me. I had a lot of stuff going on, and yeah, I've been busy, but it's the weather's turning around, and it's a nice day here in Rockford. How about you guys?
I absolutely concur wholeheartedly. My week has been highly satisfactory. A lot of positive things going down in my life. So, hey.
Awesome. Yeah, excellent.
I've been staring down to a big money hole, but been keeping myself busy and my mind occupied with preparing for Babylon Rising. So,
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
but,
me too.
Us as well. Yeah, absolutely.
that's gonna be fucking awesome.
Year of the Fool for Babylon Rising. I was thinking about it today. It's kind of exciting to be like at the beginning of a 22-year projection project. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I guess like looking at the site now, I guess this is year 6 or year 7 for me. So I kind of we hooked up with them when it was at the old spot, kind of halfway through the Tree of Life, because, well, of course, anybody that's not familiar with Babylon Festival, it started off as like, a theme of a different Spheroth of the Kabbalah. Last year being, Cather the top, but it was right around the Shadow Sphere. Interestingly enough, that year that Babylon moved to the current place, which essentially, it was a group of individuals that ran the festival in a rented or loaned out space before. As now we actually own the space ourselves, and the main organizers are the people that own the land. So that was kind of cool to be part of that transition for the festival. And now starting all over with the tarot in the new space, and being involved with it, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's gonna be a huge fucking year, man. This is more events than they have ever done before.
Yeah, just looking at that schedule, man, just looking at what we have going on in our own little chaos track is almost overwhelming, but what everybody else has going on, it's one of those situations where it's like, Jesus Christ, I'm going to have a tough time choosing, what I want to go to. So,
Right, absolutely, yeah, definitely.
All right. So this time out, we wanted to answer some listener questions and also maybe do some clarification on what Emergent Magic is. And I want to start out with a big shout out to Brandon, who has been a friend of the show and reblogs all our stuff and has really, been a booster. Thank you very much, Brandon. And we're going to go
Right
with
on.
his questions that we have here first. He wanted us to talk some more about storytelling as a protocol of magic, and also psytrance music as a form of trance / journeying or animism. So let's start out with that first part there. And this is something we touched on last time: storytelling as a protocol of magic.
Yeah, well, this was something that I was kind of was bouncing around in my mind, I guess, today earlier, when one of the other questions that I had heard was kind of trying to describe OM and describe EMK, and I think the idea of storytelling, the idea of not it being some kind of data that Google, and you read a Wikipedia, and that gives you information, but like a storytelling, like the Iliad and all these old great sagas used to be, the old tradition of storytelling is very much kind of core to what we're trying to do with OM. That's what makes OM different from other organizations. We don't have like a archive somewhere that you can tap into once you hook up with us and somehow download all this other information from all these other members of our organization that have done all this work. It doesn't work like that. With OM, there's stories. You hang out with the people that were there. You get involved with the different tribes. You come to Babylon. You come to the different events that we do. You get yourself a gutter Bible, have your own crazy stories about that. And that's kind of at the core of what we're looking at. At the initial parts of the formation of OM, we kind of threw around the ideas of, how, the kind of, ludicrous idea of a secret society in modern times that like has all their information somewhere on the internet, because that's just, it's just foolish. It's absurd to think that you're, so I mean, OM will never have that. There will never be a database. And this was another question that I had, I don't know if we've talked about it a lot on the show, but one of the big events, one of the big things that's going on at Babylon this year is this kind of induction, which is just kind of a big ceremony we're going to do to kind of like, not initiate people into the path, but induct people. So it's more like, because we're not a organization that has different levels and different, initiation levels, it's not right to say initiation, but more induction. Like, we're going to work together, do this piece of magic. We're going to all go our separate ways after this, but work on this same idea. And it's something that like will make it bona fide for us. We can in the flesh get together, do this thing. We talk a lot about it. So one of the questions was, well, what is, what about, what happens after that? Are you then like bound to something? Is it some kind of thing? So no, not really. It's just, you just become part of kind of like this, movement that we're kind of pushing towards.
Become a part of an ongoing story.
Yeah. And one of the questions I heard was, oh, so what happens after that? So say we get 50 people to do our big induction ritual, or we get 20 people, or we get 100, who knows? What happens after that? Then do we make a list of all those people that were there? And the answer is no, we don't do that. Like, I think that, certainly I'm all for the formation of a Facebook for OM, post Babylon this year. I think that's the one step that needs to be taken. And we've been cautious about it because frankly, like, I don't want it to degenerate into like some of the online chaos magic groups where it's just a bunch of stupid shit and people asking honest questions and then just getting like flamed by a bunch of jerks. And like, it's going to have to be, we're going to have to keep it good. But there's a lot of like these, psychedelic expansion mind stuff memes that are coming up, different stuff on biocentrism, from other authors that are like a lot of articles that are out there that we could be sharing that are backing up the things that we're talking about. And I think that's important. And essentially, that's going to be the most structure you're probably ever going to really see. I mean, and, a Facebook page, it's just a public forum to talk about things, message people. I mean, it's almost like the internet is, it's almost like interchangeable with that. The Facebook is just a medium on the internet anymore. But besides that, like, there's never going to be like any kind of like list of people, who are involved or not involved. You're going to know the people that are involved because you're going to know them personally. And that's the most important part about this. And that gets back again to the storytelling. Like, this is, a big part of what we're trying to do here with the ancestor stuff, and with OM is that it's this oral tradition. It's an oral tradition of magic, and yeah, we do have like the main central stuff that we write down, but like where you're never going to be able to get published exactly how we came up with the name Mungloth, for instance. Like, we can give the basic skeleton of we did this ritual and this ritual and this ritual, but until you come hang out with like the people that did the work, that's when you like hear the story. That's when you learn the different little parts, like the crazy things that happen to these different rituals. And that's an oral tradition, and that is very sacred to OM and to EMK as far as like how I'm approaching it. What do you guys think?
It links in to when we're talking about the Sabbat, where every meeting of Emergent Magi is like, yeah, there's rituals, absolutely. But there's that in-between time when you're sitting around and just talking. And you're talking about the people that came before you. You're talking about the things that were done in the past and how things are created. And it's done organically. And this is how myth is created.
Right.
Yeah. And I really feel like those are the moments in which we also create the new stories that we will tell the next time. And, I mean, we're humans. Humans are storytellers. Stories over time become legends, so our relatives, you and I together, I mean, eventually at some point in time, we become the heroes of these stories. And, if the stories are told for a long enough time, I mean, that's what creates gods in some sense,
Right.
So.
EMK is the slow magic. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about like in 100 years, in 200 years, we want like, we want these stories to be told. And, that's it's been achieved. Like, look at Crowley. Like, he was able to like, in such a small amount of time, a small lifetime, just within a couple hundred years, be so influential to so many different people's spirituality. And not to say that like, that's kind of our main goal is to be this like influential thing, but it's more like, to just be part of it, really, I think.
Right. But I think the question he was asking, what wasn't it? How is storytelling affect your magic? Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah.
Let me take a look. Hold on just a sec. It is talk about storytelling as a protocol of magic. So
Okay, so basically, my thought was, I mean, essentially, because we are storytellers as humans, magic essentially and mysticism, even more so, helps us derive meaning out of our own lives. Basically helps us write ourselves into the story of our lives. So I mean, you have a point A and a point B, and magic helps you get from here to there. So I would say that storytelling and magic go hand in hand because it's all a part of the same narrative, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
so many assholes out there who look at anthropology from a very scientific point of view are like, mythology was created to just explain how the world works, and because these people didn't understand how the Earth goes around the sun, and these people didn't understand science. It's like, that's fucking bullshit. That is not the purpose of mythology. Mythology was taking our lives and giving them narrative, giving them meaning, because this is how human beings understand things. They understand things
Right.
in stories.
Right.
And, Jason mentioned Crowley. And I know that, earlier in my magical career, one of the things that I did, because books are good too. Let's not say that books aren't good, because, books you can learn a lot. To me, it was like, I could sit down and write a book about magic, but I didn't feel qualified at the time to do that. It's like, who the fuck am I? I haven't really done a whole lot of innovative magic, but I am a writer and I am a storyteller. And guys like Crowley, Dion Fortune, all these people, they wrote stories. That was part of their magic. I wrote a novel called My Babylon, which was, a lot about my views on magic at the time. So I think that.
Yeah, I mean, Diary of a Drug Fiend is like, I mean, is one of my favorite of Crowley's works, and that's, I mean, even though it's a work of fiction, it's very much a magical, work, as well as Moonchild, of course, which inspired Parsons and the whole Babylon working. Yeah. I think that's interesting that you did mention that. It's not something that I had that had crossed my mind, but yeah, I mean, Crowley was obviously I mean, he did a lot of poetry, a lot of fiction stuff, and he was a prolific author outside of just magical stuff specifically.
And I could be wrong about this. I'm trying to think of the exact person who said it, but I think it was Pete Carroll in just one of the random books. He said humans have a need for transcendence, and one of the ways he defined transcendence was a need to feel a part of something bigger than yourself. And just kind of talked about how people find this in relationships, religion, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, weaving your own story through magic like that and finding meaning within your own life, I mean, that is a means of transcendence, if you will. So same concept, really.
And to me, storytelling and writing novels, stories in themselves, are kind of the stealth way of getting people into magic. Because a lot of times you could write a book about magic and people will just like, either they don't believe in magic or they already have their own views on it and they kind of dismiss everything. But if you tell them a story, that rattles around in their brains.
That's
and they
very
think
true.
about it.
And that's interesting because that's kind of like one of the things that I will run into occasionally in my personal life. I'm a very open magician. It's like it's been very publicly known in my little small town that I've been into black magic for a uber long amount of fucking time. And I remember at the very beginning people saying shit to me, like people I was friends with were just like, well, none of this is real, right? Like you realize none of this is real. And at first I had to be like, hey, no, you don't know. But it's like the problem is they're not understanding at all what magic is. I mean, they're like, they've got this idea in their mind that it's this kind of stage show, levitation, mystical bullshit, and they're completely missing the whole fucking point of what magic is. Now, if you kind of fast forward that, if I go up to somebody who might have that same predisposition and explain a typical evening at, say, Babylon, where there's this ritual and then there's drumming and then there's people dancing naked around a fire and blah blah, there's a lot more of an understanding of oh shit, you really do fucking magic. I understand that. And it's very, I mean, I found that to be very true. Like, explaining kind of your experiences, like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I do magic. Well, what is that? Well, okay, we all like, did this crazy thing, and explain some kind of ritual that you've done. That's the more extreme, typically the better. And people are like, oh my God, fuck, I didn't realize that it was like this deep introspective, taking apart your own like personal vices and stuff, and like exposing them to other people, and like all these fucking things that we do in magic. Like, I just thought it was rabbits out of fucking hats. And it's not.
I thought you were like lighting a candle and making a wish or something.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, let me tell you about one of the fucking black masses I've been to. It's like they're all different. And I mean, not necessarily anybody thinks the devil's real. It's like that's not what it's about. It's about like
except the devil's real.
It's about camaraderie. I mean, it's about a lot of fucking things. And us redefining, I mean, it with Emergent Magick, the defining magic is the art of altering consciousness. I think a step in the right direction away from, the old paradigm of like magic is this thing that causes, change, in the material world. When in fact it's more in consciousness, which in return, because consciousness creates the universe, therefore has an effect. So I mean, I think that's a good starting point toward pushing more towards that. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think telling stories, it's a better way to kind of communicate it.
And that's it. You tell people, hey, this is what I did last weekend. I danced around a fire naked with a bunch of chicks, and we did fucking drugs and rituals, and it was fucking great. And you're going to TGI Friday every weekend and drinking margaritas until you die. Maybe you might want to try.
I'll drink a margarita at TGI Fridays. What's up with that? Come on.
I love TGI Fridays. I fixed their neon sign.
TGI Fridays. Oh. Anyway, so okay. I think we covered the storytelling aspect, and I would encourage anyone to write a story about their magic. Just if you have any writing skill at all, write it down. If not, come up with a story that you want to tell. That's another great thing. There's a lot of great storytelling podcasts out there. I would highly recommend Risk. It's a podcast that it's all storytelling, a lot of stuff about sex and a lot of stuff about crazy shit people do. And the whole, premise of it is take a risk, get the fuck out there, have some stories to tell.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I mean, like, go out and, go freak out somewhere, like go somewhere you've never been before. Like, go to a club you'd never go to, go see a band of a type of music that you would never usually go to. And like, like put yourself out there, get yourself out of your comfort zone. There's a great meme online that's like a circle, and it's like where the magic happens in your comfort zone, and then like where the magic happens is outside of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would never go to a fucking Fish concert. Fish? What? But you're like, hey man, come to Fish. This is awesome. Like,
I was right.
Okay. What the fuck?
Speaking of which, speaking of getting out of your comfort zone, I think that almost leads nicely into the next question that they had about, what was it, psytrance and music playing into consciousness, because that's actually what I did when I was doing some very heavy ego magic in my life. I very deliberately wanted to stop being an introverted, shy individual, and so I started raving. I started putting on costumes, eating MDMA, going to EDM shows. I hate EDM, or hated it at the time. I've learned a love for it now, but that was way out of my comfort zone. Completely allowed me to redefine myself. So let's talk about psytrance and how getting out of your comfort zone can put you in that place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've definitely had some psytrance experiences. I will say that my psytrance experiences were at the same events as magical events. That's about all I can say. But I certainly have brothers and sisters in the craft of magic that are heavily influenced by that type of music. Like, I'd like to just like more or less answer this from a general standpoint. Like, I don't really, that's not a kind of music that I grok with personally. But I think in general that music, of course, can be very transcendental. I mean, I come from like, I'm a deadhead. My first magical experiences was like, going to Dead shows and, you know, tripping on acid with a bunch of, you know, 100,000 crazy hippies, you know, and that whole kind of culture, which, you know, was like very much a, you know, for better or worse, like spiritual, you know, escape for people for a long fucking time. It kind of grew out of the 60s, and you see that kind of spill over into, you know, Fish Tour now, and some of these other things are going on. And of course, like branching off into the rave scene, where you kind of had that come, you know, that's kind of the next big step after you get like out of like, you know, the 60s and 70s first wave of psychedelia. When you get into the 80s and 90s, you know, electronic music, and, you know, I think also the introduction of MDMA on a mass scale also kind of kicked off that second psychedelic renaissance, which, although, you know, the Dead were still touring, all that stuff is going on, you certainly can't say that, I mean, the big steps that were taken in society as far as like the, you know, the old Haight-Ashbury type scene thing that happened, you know, in the 90s, 80s and 90s for us in the rave scene, you know, very much, you know, internationally, and, you know, that kind of, and it had the same, you know, kind of negative side effects that ended up, you know, coming out of the acid test. You know, the acid test started out, you know, as, you know, a lot of fun. Everybody was doing this stuff. You had the Merry Pranksters, you had the Summer of Love, you know, 1967, you know, then you got some, you know, crazy shit that happens, you know, the press gets a hold of it, you know, the politicians get a hold of it, and it becomes, you know, a tool to, you know, essentially make money and keep people down. And you see prohibition the first time. This is more or less the same thing that happens with MDMA, you know, later, you know, the next wave, you know, it's a beneficial drug at first that they're studying, they're having a lot of good results with. And, you know, the DA kind of swoops in and is like, well, this is something that we can arrest people for and make this money.
Yeah. But I mean, there, it's kind of to link it back up with the first question. I mean, you drop a bomb like LSD or MDMA or really any psychedelic on culture at large, but you kind of rip it away from, you know, any narrative or any purpose or meaning. I mean, it can be an enlightening tool, but it's sort of like, you know, only a handful of people seem to make it to the bottleneck, whereas the rest seem to end up, you know, crazy, addicted, what have you. I mean, like I said, it can be an enlightening thing, but, you know, without that narrative, without that meaning that we were talking about with the first question, without some sort of cultural storyline to put it in its place and give it some sort of power, it really just becomes like a haphazard situation where it's like, well, you might get something out of this, or you might just end up another fucking troubled teen on drugs. So,
well, I would say this: I do enjoy electronic music. I don't know if I can specifically name Psytrance as a band that any groups that I know, but you know, there is types of music like Psytrance, like the great jam bands like Grateful Dead and Fish, like, you know, some other electronic music that is designed to expand consciousness. It's almost like you look at drugs, and, you know, Zai was talking about, you know, there's the drugs that are there to kill pain and get you addicted. Opium, you know, all that stuff. You know, speed, you know, to me, the analog for that in music is like fucking Katy Perry and Top 40, you know, where it's talking about your boyfriend and, you know, blah, blah, blah to the end of time, whatever. And that stuff, it doesn't take you anywhere. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that about pop music. I mean, you think about the evolution as well. Like, I mean, look at like the Beatles. Like, tomorrow they're starting a Beatles radio station on Sirius XM. Super psyched about it. If you look at their early stuff, I Want to Hold Your Hand, you know, this kind of Please Please Me. It was very popular, but what ended up happening when the Beatles took LSD was you get into these, like, you know, Within You, Without You, some of these great compositions that are extremely, you know, spiritually heavy kind of things. You know, another thing too that I think we're kind of skipping over is the kind of obvious thing is we talk a lot about, you know, the Sabbat, and I think the whole thing with electronic music with Psytrance is that we're really just getting back, as we usually do with a lot of the conversations about stuff, you know, on EMK, is to the caveman times and drumming. And the fact is that, like, they're, you know, drumming around the fire, hours and hours of drumming and chanting is essentially the same thing that you're getting with, you know, modern electronic music. It's a resurgence of that, you know, ingrained tribal thing that we all have, like that that part of our soul that is drums. Because drums were the first. I mean, percussion instrument. I mean, that's what started music. That's what started, and it was always very, very entwined with, ritual and, with ceremony. I mean, you look at like the Roman times, drums and horns and all this stuff to like present the royalty. There's always been kind of this thread, but we talk a lot about the spot and the drumming being a big part of it, and I think that's essentially what he's getting at. I mean, everybody's going to have their own fetishization of the type of music that they really like, that they find the spirituality with, through depending on your own, personal taste. But we're all essentially just going back to that, original, around the fire, playing the drums, the shaman dances, and the first beginnings of magic. And I just think it's the same thread, that kind of ties it all through. We just have more modern versions.
Now, we do have some other questions coming through. So just to wrap up that second part there from Brandon, he related it to shamanistic journey. Now, love it or hate it, or whatever you think about it, if you grew up in the 80s, I know it's a hard mental block that's been put in your head, but drugs are really a part of this combination. They have always been a part of this combination, all the way back. You're talking about Göbekli Tepe. Okay, here's an ancient, monolithic structure that was built 8,000 years before Stonehenge. These were hunter-gatherers who built these things, not settled people. And what they found there were vats for making beer and for growing molds for shamanistic purposes. And, one of the protocols of Emergent Magick is magic without drugs isn't.
Yeah, and again, this is something that somebody else had asked about too. And again, disclaimer, obviously we're not suggesting that anybody do any illegal drugs. We would never do that. But we're talking about we're talking about like a wide variety of different things. I mean, we're talking about like tobacco and alcohol and coffee, caffeine, and coffee is specifically, and tobacco are ancient drugs that people have used for a long time. And like, you've got all these different experiences out there. And as far as like, I was asked a question about like, decriminalization of psychedelics. Like, is that something that OM is like a specific thing for? Like MAPS, like you've got the multi-disciplinary psychedelic study group, and those guys are lobbying, essentially working with scientists to try and legalize some of these substances so they can be studied better. In the forefront is MDMA and psilocybin seem to be the two that are going to be the next that are legalized. And of course, marijuana is one of the big ones that is going to be legal everywhere soon. It's just a matter of time. But as far as like our stance on that, like as far as like would OM be trying to like seek some kind of like waiver to be able to consume psychedelics as a religious group? Like, no, that's like a little bit far beyond like our reach. That's more like that would be something that a political organization that had membership dues and perhaps physical locations. That's a lot different. OM is a philosophy. OM is a thing passed between people through storytelling, through events, through one-on-one experience. But it isn't, we're not MAPS. We're not like we're not normal. We're not a lobbying group or like a political organization in any kind of way. Although certainly we would be doing magic to effectively make everything legal. Absolutely. I mean, that's on our list.
So magically yes, politically no.
No. That's
that's really not our place, but I'm sure individual members do what they can to make that a reality. All right, so we got some other questions coming in. Let me go ahead and start reading those off.
All right.
Number one, the traditional magical journal seems to follow a scientific method. Considering the intent of EMK to be a longer working, would you suggest magical journals for EMK be written as a story?
Wow, that's a really good question.
That's an awesome question.
That's an excellent
I like
question.
the
Well,
idea.
I would say absolutely that is a fucking excellent idea. That's an excellent idea. Like, with me, the magical journal, just to where I'm coming from with it a little bit, like I'm not a huge magical journal guy. Like, I used to keep extensive magical journals when I was starting. Like that was one of the first like main steps. Like when you're starting magic, that magical journal, like that is so key. It's so central. After you've been doing magic for 10 or 15 or 20 years, it changes a little bit. I'm not a journaling guy. Some people are more into journals. I do keep random journals, but for me, it's more like, it's more like it mixed with artwork for me. Like rather than like I sit down and tell a story, it'll be like, I'll sit down, enter some information about a certain period of time, and then like add in like artwork with it, and that's something that I know that another magician and adept friend of mine had told me one time. He's like, I don't really journal stuff. I just, I have a book of art. I also have another, there's a German magician that I had spent some time with who had a magical journal that was primarily artwork as well, that was absolutely beautiful, but as far as like, could you take that and apply it and make it a story? Like, absolutely. Like, I think, that's something that you should definitely, if you've come up with that idea, then you're right along the lines of what we're talking about with EMK. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would actually echo that sentiment mostly. I think that when I very first started doing magic, strictly magical journal was something I kept more frequently. I do still journal now, but like there's a lot of crossover between like magical and just mundane shit. You know what I mean? Because I think that the more and more that you do magic, the more and more your life becomes intertwined with magic. And so, one day maybe you did do a heavy working, and then, for the next 18 days, maybe you just lived your normal ass boring life. But if you go back and read that in retrospect, you're going to kind of see how the magic you did here on day one unfolded over that next 18 days. So yeah, it becomes for me less strictly magical and is more of a working daily journal. But you are right when it comes to like art. I'm not necessarily a visual artist, but definitely lots of doodling and bullshit goes on in my journals as well.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
My take would be, magic is art. And I think that most everyone has some kind of creative outlet that they do. And you should definitely turn that to magic. If you write stories, then write stories in your magical journal. If you do art, then do art. If you make quilts, okay, maybe you can make a quilt every time that you come to a new level of understanding in your magic. And I think that would be fucking cool.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the ideas are endless. I think as far as like how does the magical journal apply to EMK? Like, I would say that it is like definitely view it as a lot more fluid thing. Like, no, it doesn't have to be scientific method. It doesn't have to be the old school way of, write down the phase of the moon, write down what time, write down what you ate for breakfast that day and how long you did each practice. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be a story. Absolutely. It can be a story. It can be artwork. It can be, and it's not necessary. I mean, EMK doesn't require a journal, but certainly, I mean, it time and time again, every magician is going to tell you that it's a good idea, especially at the beginning. To do that, it's a tried and tested tool, and I think it's a great idea.
And I would double that. I would say, when I did my novitiate for IoT, it's like I did the standard phase of the moon,
right.
Astrology, all
it's
that
required
shit.
for that.
Yeah, and it's like it feels like it was a waste. A lot of it. It could have been a lot more significant and a lot more personal if I just did my art. Right. So do that.
Well, I mean, part of that's like learning to do any craft or art. I mean, magic being an art, you know what I mean? Like when I first started playing guitar when I was younger, I mean, it's not like I could have just jumped into like writing significant pieces for myself. I had to learn to play a fucking chord first. So, I mean, like that very beginning basic stuff I think is really necessary for a lot of people that are just starting out.
Yeah, certainly.
So.
All right, next question.
That's a practicing tool.
You have touched on some connection between the Gutter Bible and mental health. Discuss the relationship between EMK, OEM, and mental health.
Well, okay. you know, I mean, the relation is the Gutter Bible is certainly was created by somebody with extreme mental trauma. Schizophrenia or something else. And you know, we touched on this a little bit in one of the earlier episodes where we talk about like, you know, the prophets of old were essentially our, you know, the people in our loony bins today. You know, people used to have these visions and, you know, would start, you know, whole societies are founded on like, you know, burning bushes speaking to people. And like in modern times, you don't have that. I thought it was interesting. I read an article recently that had to do with ancestor stuff and with people that were people of color that were in that tradition. And it was a young woman who started to essentially like hear voices, and she had no context for that in her modern life. But she ended up hooking up with a Polero or somebody that was practicing in the voodoo tradition, in the Yoruba tradition, that was like, no, like these are your ancestors essentially. And she had more or less just readjusted to society with like this new understanding that sometimes she had these kind of like voices, if you will, and it wasn't like she was going insane, and it wasn't like, you know, bad or anything. It was just part of her tradition, of her bloodline, you know, that goes back to Africa, and that was a very big part of the practice. And I found that kind of interesting. I think it goes kind of along the same lines. But you know, as far as the connection of mental health directly, like, I mean, I don't know. What do you think, James?
Okay, let me get ready to rant here.
Mm-hmm.
So, psychology, modern psychology, it is only up until very recently that psychotics and the things that they've seen and their delusions were in any way taken seriously by psychiatrists. They would just say, yeah, this shit that they're saying has nothing to do with what's actually wrong with them, has nothing to do with what's going on. It's just delusions. It's just, you know, here's some medication and let's get them back into society. And it's only recently that they said, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should listen to what they're saying. Maybe there's some insights into what's going on in their head. No shit. And to me, modern psychology has a flaw, a huge flaw, especially since it's become commercialized and it's become a way to get people back to work and get them back into society. You know, I talk to a lot of psychiatrists in my day job, which I won't talk about, but you know, they talk about therapy and they talk about what's normal. Mm-hmm. And every time I meet a psychiatrist, I ask them, so how much of your practice is informed by anthropology and primatology? Freud was very much keen on these subjects. So was Jung. And it's because how do you know what's fucking normal? How do you know what human beings do as animals if you don't study these things? Mm-hmm. Modern psychiatry has deemed what is normal as to what passes in society. Well, what if your fucking society is pathological?
Yeah, well.
And that's...
Right, there's that.
And to me, EMK is about healing a pathological society.
Certainly. That's an excellent statement.
I would argue EMK is more about, or at least for me, healing not necessarily an entire society, but an individual within a society. As you know, you kind of have to start with one before you can really work on anybody else. So that would be my perspective on it, honestly. The relationship between insanity or psychological disorders and EMK, I wouldn't say there's a direct link other than potentially uncovering that which is quote unquote damaged within yourself. And when I say damaged, I only mean as you define it as such to yourself, you know,
Right.
And
So
based on
like
that, like what can you work on? So,
yeah, like the parts of, the parts, the things that you think, and the when you're kind of, having psychotic experiences or whatnot, like the things that you're like, man, am I crazy? What is this? EMK kind of pulls that all back in and is like, no, you can, like, all these different things, all these different thoughts and these weird experiences, they all have some kind of context. They all have some type of meaning that's important to you, because it's just your consciousness. It's a universe. So I think,
and again,
yeah.
Sorry. I mean, to cut you off. I mean, that goes back to the first question, which again is building a personal narrative and working yourself into being the own hero of your own story, if you will.
Right.
You know what I mean? Finding meaning in these psychotic experiences, and that's really the way to kind of heal yourself within this. So that potentially could be the direct link that I would see.
And I would say David is right in that it is about healing the individual. But, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I wouldn't be writing these books. I wouldn't be doing these workshops if I didn't think that this path would be useful for a lot of people. Not everybody. It's not for everybody, but
Sure,
for a lot of people, I think it'd be extremely helpful for them.
Yeah, but again, I agree with both of you. Yeah, I mean, it's a journey that starts within yourself, and then you kind of reach out, and hopefully it spreads. And but yeah, Gutter Bible definitely, definitely comes from an insane person, and that, I kind of find that very, just that we're kind of, our starting point is kind of from that, other, like, the edge of sanity, and that's kind of where religion has always come from.
All right, let's see if we can get some more of these questions in there.
Sure.
What does OEM intend to do to break the modern magic mold of building tribes of mainly white males and have a more diverse tribe?
Kind of difficult question for three males to answer, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, personally, I don't even necessarily strictly identify within that particular binary, being a queer individual. So I don't know. I think early on we did kind of talk about that.
I mean, I think we've stated it. I think just that is the answer. Like, I mean, we've had this podcast. We've brought it up several times. We had an episode on cultural appropriation. I mean, we've come out many times and made it very clear that, like, what we're trying to do is not have a homogenous, group that, one of the reasons, I mean, just from the beginning, one of the reasons that I chose Magi, Order of Emergent Magi, is because Magi is not a gender. It's not gender. It's gender fluid. Dude, Magi can be male or female or anything in between, as far as I understand it. So, I mean, right from the beginning, the name Magi, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that because I wanted it to be all inclusive. The idea of, like, frater and soror, and that's one aspect when you're talking about the gender rainbow, if you will, and then you've got the racial blood rainbow as well. So it's kind of like, and a lot of other things too. You've got philosophical, you've got all these. So, I mean, it's always been our stated goal to have as much diversity as we possibly can. Like, how successful we're going to be at that remains to be seen. But, I mean, I think just heading out that way and being like, this is what we're trying to do, hopefully is going to attract more diversity to our group.
Now, the first thing I would say is, we're ready to listen. Since we've started this, restarted the Scroll of Thoth about Emergent Magick, we've said every episode, ask us questions, call us out on our bullshit. And we're certainly not in a position to say to females and people of color what we should do, but we'll listen to you.
That's a good answer.
We want you to tell us what we do wrong and what we could do right. We do strive to make everything inclusive. We do strive to have rituals, built around nurturing and around subjects that might be of interest to women. Having people of color in magic, I think has a lot to do. I respect their traditions. I think EMK respects their traditions a lot more than traditional magic has in the past.
I would say that's true.
The diasporic religions, until very recently, mainstream magic has shit on them, and they have been the ones who have kept the ancient tradition alive, and they deserve much more respect than they've had.
Right. Yeah, I think, another thing I want to touch on too, we have talked about culture appropriation, and it's always going to come back up. I think that's an important step. Like I know, when we talked about earlier, when we were talking about Santeria and Voodoo and how, like, we may work, like I may work with Legba, Shu Legba, Papa Legba is one of my favorite, entities, but I would never say this, I would never say to people like, oh, I'm a practitioner of Santeria or I'm a practitioner of Voodoo, because that's not necessarily true. There's a book that just came out recently by an author who, a psychedelic magic book, who claims in there to, like, basically it's a white dude claiming to be a traditional shaman. He claims to have, learned the ayahuasca ceremony, and essentially has a book that he just published. And he's just this white dude in England claiming to be a bona fide ayahuasca healer initiate. And that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You don't do that. That's never going to be in our book. We're never going to go, when EMK, the published stuff comes out, when the Emergent Magick book comes out, we might talk about traditions, we might talk about this and that, but nobody's ever going to come out and be like, oh yeah, I'm part of this. I'm part of a sacred, magic mushroom tradition that goes back to Mexico 1,000 years, because we're not. And just because you might meet somebody and work with somebody in that context, you're never going to have that. And, that kind of really bothers me when people go out and present themselves as something that they just can't be, more or less. So yeah, I mean, I think, that's the best we can do is, try and self-police ourselves and always have that conversation be open. Like you said, like, we don't have an answer to that, but yeah, I mean, certainly, like, we're looking for that answer. And I mean,
it's important to us.
Yeah. It's important to us. And we've been talking about it. And I think that's kind of the key. It's the best we can do.
And, I wouldn't judge someone on what they say that they know. I know white people who have legitimately gone to, African traditions and legitimately gone through initiation. And that's great. I also know a lot of white people who went, somewhere and just paid a bunch of money and got initiated, which is kind of bullshit.
Right.
But the other thing I would say is the practice of shamanism, the practice of using drugs, the practice of dancing by the fire, the drumming, that's universal across cultures. Now, each culture has their specific spirits that they have talked to and developed relationships with. And I would highly recommend anyone to read the works of Jake Stratton Kent, who proposes that the Goetia is not this, high magic Victorian or Renaissance thing that was developed, but these spirits are actually go way back to prehistoric traditions that have been carried forward and should be treated as such. So, check that out. So there's plenty of stuff within your own culture for you to work this type of magic, but it doesn't mean you have to be into Lakume or say that you're a voodoo practitioner or any of that.
Right.
There's kind of a follow-up question to this, which kind of hits close to home. As an alpha, I wonder how OEM maintains an absence of hierarchy in the tribe/clan magical communism. How do you keep people who are dominant personalities, I think is what this question is asking, how do you keep that in check?
Yeah, well, I think I had heard a question somewhat like this before. So if there are no degrees, then who are the leaders in the group? And I mean, to me, like, the answer to that is that it's essentially organic. Like, when you have a small group, like, there are going to be people that are going to lead in different situations, and people that are going to, do other things within that tribe. And I think, it's kind of a slippery slope there. Like, how do you, if you have like a megalomaniac in your group who just wants to control everything all the time, how do you keep that from being a problem? Well, what I would say really is just,
how do you keep that?
Yeah, right. How do you keep it? I would say like the answer is kind of the reverse. I would say that the structure, initiation structures, levels of an initiation have not, solved that. So,
No.
I mean, going the other way is just kind of the best that we can do. I think, newer people to the group are always going to have a newer thing, but I think, our idea with OM is that you get together and that it's a group effort,
Yeah, I think honestly, like you said, people will kind of naturally step up in certain situations and drive certain projects. I'm just as you talk about this, I'm thinking about the different creative projects, different bands I've been involved with, and how they've functioned differently. There sometimes it does evolve to the point where there's kind of a go-to guy. When you get stuck in a part and you're like, well, what do we do next? You kind of look at the one guy or person and you're saying, oh, this person usually pumps out ideas. Let's look at them.
Right. Right.
But then in other situations, it's much more organic and much more of a group effort. So I would hope that in most EMK situations that it would be much more of a group effort. But I'm positive that there's going to be many situations in which we do look to a certain individual and we're like, Jason, I don't know where to go with this. What do you want to do next? So.
Right, and like taken to the extreme, I think one of the other questions I'd been asked, like so what then happens? Taken to the extreme of the situation, if you have a group, you get together, and then one person or a couple people, and they just don't get along, and it becomes this kind of blow up situation. Well, essentially, then you just break up, just like a band.
Yeah, break up the band
because there is no order. It's not like, oh, we've got these 4 people, and if these, we got 5 people and, these 2 want to do this crazy thing and the 3 of us don't, but, if we lose them, then we can't be an official OM temple anymore because we won't have enough people or something like that. But you don't have any of those kind of worries. I mean, as far as like, it's just going to have to be like, and I said this before, it was like police yourselves kind of thing. I mean, it's just going to have to be like, there's not going to be like a grand lodge that you can go to and be like, oh, so-and-so has been, acting so bad, and we want them to no longer be able to say they're an OM, person. Like, that's just not how it's going to work, because it's no full structure, and because there's no, because it's just stories and there's nothing concrete, and I think that also, in a way, kind of protects us, because there's also like, and this is another question that I got asked, what about your absolute fringe nut jobs? So what if somebody that's totally insane buys Emergent Magick, drops a bunch of acid, and like jumps off a fucking cliff or shoots somebody? Where does that leave us? And this has happened, like, I mean, as far as I know, with Liebernal and Psychonaut, there's been a couple times when there's been some weirdness, but nothing that ever came out. But I mean, essentially, it's a philosophy. There's nowhere in Emergent Magick that it's like you have to do this or you have to do that. And, it's more or less like, we're unleashing a philosophy on the world. We're not giving anybody any mandates to do anything, and certainly not responsible for anybody's response, anybody's actions, outside of our own central tribe, but I mean, we hope for the best, obviously.
I struggle with this a lot. I know that the alpha male part of me says, maybe they should speak the fuck up. But doing that pretty much makes sure that there's so much that you're not going to learn, that, there's so many people who are not going to contribute that should be.
Right.
And I think, sorry, for EMK, one thing that's really important with our gatherings is that everyone is welcome to present a ritual. Everyone is welcome to, change a ritual, to give their own input on it. So that is the main thing. Make sure people have a forum to express themselves that's non-judgmental is really the best that you can do. And people do sit out rituals because they're tired or because they got something else going on, but it's never okay to sit out a ritual just because you don't like that type of magic, or that's not the thing I'm into. Those are exactly the rituals you need to go to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, obviously, like, you can't do every ritual. Sometimes people just need some space, sometimes blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think that I'm not very key on people just being like, oh, well, I just don't do that type of. I mean, yeah, you should try and do. I mean, you should work with everybody. You should do everything. I mean, the variety of the different types of rituals is what's going to give you more experience. It's going to be what makes each individual group, grow, as it were.
All right.
Sure.
So,
and you should do all the things, but I mean,
Yeah, right.
We got some other people asking questions, so I definitely want to get these in here where we might go a little bit over.
That's fine.
In a recent podcast, it was mentioned that EMK tends to emerge when a practitioner has a fair few years under their belt. Would it be possible for someone to grow into it naturally from early on?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Like, yeah. I mean, you're gonna see aspects of that from the beginning, especially now that we're saying it. I mean, that statement that you have after several years emergent practice, like what I said, like in any paradigm, if you go to people that are 10, 20 years into it, they have aspects of emergent magic. That's before emergent magic was known. Like now that we know the term emergent magic, now that we're talking about emergent magic, like if you're starting from the understanding of that, if you've been practicing magic for 20 years and you read our book in 6 months, you're going to be like, oh man, there was emergence way back here. There was emergence way back. And then you're going to know that. So it's more just that now it's become a term. So I think absolutely, as far as like the actual working the actual gutter Bible paradigm stuff, like our actual stuff is great to start right off on. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea of getting emergent magic out, doing this podcast, making it like this word virus type thing, so that people have a context for when they start what they're looking for and what's going to happen. And yeah. What do you think?
You definitely don't need to have any experience to get involved. And we've had plenty of people with very little magical experience jump in and start doing rituals with us and just going, wow, man, this is awesome. Let's keep doing it.
Yeah.
So,
and that being said, years down the line, it's just you're just gonna have exponentially, you're gonna have these kind of bigger things type happen, because you're gonna be more comfortable in ritual. Things develop over time. It's just like any other skill. Like Zaya brought up bands. Like the first band you're in high school, how is that compared to like the band that you're in when you're in your 40s? I mean, it's going to be different.
Or even if you're in the same band, if for some reason you survive, that band is totally different than when you first started, I would hope.
Right. Yeah. Right. Of course.
And the reason Jason has talked about the past where we've had very experienced magicians work on this gutter Bible stuff. Admittedly, it's to give it credibility.
Right.
It's hard to go out and say, yeah, we got a bunch of 18-year-old kids together for their first time ritual and did this.
Right.
And that's why it's awesome. Honestly, I think that would be cool to fucking do, to get a bunch of people, maybe not 18-year-old, but a bunch of, first timers together to do a ritual, because I have seen just great magical effect coming from people, with that beginner's, energy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's similar to like when chaos magic was being pioneered. I mean, the people pioneering chaos magic had done everything else. I mean, they were very experienced magicians,
Mm-hmm.
Now, fast forward to where we are now, we have kids that are hopping on the internet and learning chaos magic on Reddit forums and what have you. So I mean, that's where they're starting, is where once experienced magicians were pioneering a path. And so I mean, I would say that's where this probably started as well. You had to have somebody pioneer, and it probably wasn't going to be 18-year-olds who didn't know anything about magic. So
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so last question I want to get to. What role does language play in EMK and the gutter Bible? Which is a huge fucking question.
That's a really big question. I got a whole study of linguistics going.
Language is a disease.
Well, I mean,
a topic for next time.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. All I could really say is, I mean, the language of EMK, like the words like Mungloff and Tazaki Kaaye, these different entities, if you will, those all came from ritual, except for the ones that came directly from the gutter Bible. Like Rashwan, that there is a mad woman. Rashwan is a line in the Gutter Bible. Mama Eowek, which is another vine of EMK magic, that's in there. That's written in there. The Gutter Bible is written in 7 different languages, from what we can tell. It says in there that the person has a master's in 7 languages. It's in English in parts, and it's in several different Indian dialects. We only know this because I have Indian money that has some of the same characters on it. But it's pretty much untranslatable. I think that's a very kind of cool thing about it, that you can't just read through it, that it's kind of this mysterious thing. And I've had people from India who speak the language natively look at it and not be able to directly translate it. So it may be a mix of a lot of different dialects. And it's really hard to say, but certainly it certainly has a lot going on as far as language.
Yeah, and purposefully we have not sought to have much of it translated, because there is a power in what is referred to usually as barbaric languages, or languages that have no specific meaning, but the sounds have feelings. It's always been a huge part of magic. Having secret languages, things like that. I would also go back to us talking about journaling, in that as far as EMK goes, it goes beyond language. It is an art, so it can be visual, it can be audio, and all those elements should be a part of it.
Sure, I think a lot of the stuff with EMK, like EMK, that alone, Emergent Magic. These are kind of like the cornerstones. Like, these phrases are kind of like what we're trying to get into the modern lexicon. So that's really kind of important. Ogham, Order of Emergent Magi, these things that we're kind of trying to get into the common mind a little bit. I would say, relates to language more or less. Interesting question.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to come back to that on a later show. David, you have anything you want to wrap up with?
Oh, we got him?
I don't know. He seems to be frozen. Oh, no.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
now we can hear you. Yes. Do you have anything you wanted to wrap up with about language?
No, I think that's a really, really big topic, and that could consume many episodes, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
All right. We will definitely come back to that one for you. Guys, we are at an hour.
All right.
And thank you for hanging out. I want to say once again to everyone out there, there's Scroll of Thoth on Facebook. There's a contact link on the Scroll of Thoth website. Hit us up with your questions, definitely. And, there's a chat going on every time we record one of these live. So you can use that as well, which is where we got a bunch of questions tonight. Thank you guys for coming out. And I think this is a really great show.
All right. Yeah, excellent, gentlemen. It was fun. We'll do it again next time.
Peace.
All right.